So let's take a look at one strong tournament army list for every single faction in the game, and see what people are using in the new 40k, after the balanced data slate, and a whole bunch of new detachments. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking army lists, with a look at one for each and every faction in the game. For this video I thought we'd have a focused look at one example at something that's reasonably strong and successful for each and every Warhammer 40k faction, particularly in the context of all of Warhammer 40k's recent updates. There were some massive changes in the balanced data slate, and plenty of armies got some really quite interesting Grotmas detachments, some of which were clearly going to be challenging for one of the strongest things in their armies. As ever with these ones, they're not necessarily the 100% certain best thing. I tried to have a look at the events since the balanced data slate, and there were quite a few last weekend. I feel at this point it's probably going to be a bit of a period of experimentation, probably quite a lot of people trying out the Grotmas detachments, as they won't have had too much chance to so far, and it certainly seems that a good bunch of them managed to find some success. I just treat this as one quick look at what a talented player managed to do well with, as generally to place highly in grand tournaments, you both need to play your army well, and also to have a fairly optimised army list and not just be taking random stuff. The lists here are broadly from best coast pairings, besides the French ones that use their own mini headquarters system, and the ones that are looked for were either going undefeated or going 4 wins to 1 loss in a 5-round event since the balance update. And for each army I tried to find perhaps the best performance at the biggest tournament so far, though obviously it's a little bit arbitrary. Say for example, it's a bit hard to weigh up someone who wins a small grand tournament versus someone who places very highly at a massive one, and some armies just have better placings versus others. In any case, let's take a look at one from each faction, talk through a few of the strengths of the units that they chose, and any interesting things that might have changed since the data slate and the Grotmas detachments. Jumping straight into it, and first up we have the Space Marines. They're perhaps the single most changed army in the balance update, having loads of datasheets rewritten, plus the massive boost to Oath of Moment, which really impacted Rabute Guilliman, given that he can hand out that +1 to wound boosted oath twice over. I think Ultramarines Ironstorm certainly seemed like one of the big winners on paper, and it looks like it's one of the big winners in practice as well, with Conan Jennings taking second at the single biggest event, I think it was, Glass City GT, with 97 players. Ironstorm gives you Space Marine vehicle support, single unit rerolls, plus a bunch of good supporting stratagems, good damage dealers, nice return fire ones, and a specific boost to walkers. The firebase on this one's really quite scary, with 3 ballistas dreadnoughts, with those las cannons doing really well with inbuilt rerolls. Plus they enjoy the single wound reroll, and then a mighty 3 Vindicators, really nice sturdy damage and defense tanks that sort of hit very hard and can weather a bunch of punishment, particularly with Armor of Contempt. There's also a Stormspeeder Hammer Strike, which will be able to remove cover on their targets, and a unit of Incursors that will be able to give them +1 to hit as well. Between that and double Oath of Moment from Rabute Guilliman himself, they're going to be hitting obscenely hard. Guilliman can also throw some free stratagems out to them as well, perhaps a free Overwatch or Armor of Contempt in your own turn, and helping out with the damage dealer stratagems or even command point rerolls if it matters when they come to shoot. On top of that, there's also Marneus Calgar, who will be keeping the command points flowing as well, so loads of stratagems going around in this one. It looks like he'll be joining those company heroes for a cheap and effective bodyguard, and they've got a lot of fight in them and are fairly hard to take down. There's a combi weapon lieutenant with Master of Machine War to allow the vehicles to advance and shoot or fall back and shoot. 5 intercessors with a power fist, looks like they've taken the place that infiltrators might have run. The deep strike to now maybe being a tiny bit less critical, now 3-inch deep strikes are 6-inch, and between the sticky objectives and just shooting against infantry kind of obscenely hard, I'm not too surprised to see more of these. Finally, there's a unit of scouts with a missile launcher, always nice for some screening in the midboard or return to reserves. Overall, a massive amount of damage here, and definitely not an army that you can just try and close with all the vehicles, given that Guilliman and Marneus Calgar can both charge back really hard. Definitely looks like it's got enough damage, but might just be making some tricky decisions as to scoring primary and secondary objectives. I'm generally going to do one per faction, and I'm counting Space Marines as a single faction as opposed to a whole bunch of different chapters. I did think that I'd just give a shout out to this Imperial Fist Firestorm list though that I talked about in a previous video. Joe Gozowski's list, only losing to the winner in the final at the Winter Slaughter GT. It's basically a unit of 6 Aggressors, Eradicators and Inceptors, so going proper Imperial Fist Gravis there with some upgrund shooting from the Firestorm. Tor Garadon and an Apothecary Biologist, helping out the Aggressors and the Eradicators maybe, and then backed up by a bunch of Repulsors and some Infiltrators for deep strike denial things. I just thought that one looked really fun, works well with Firestorm, and I'll certainly enjoy the boosted Oath of Moment. Next up we've got the Adepta Sororitas. They were hit really quite hard with their Miracle Dice and lots of nerfs to their Bringers of Flame detachment. I was guessing that they'd probably be pivoting towards Hallowed Martyrs, though it still seems at least a few people have had some tournament success with them. They've definitely not dropped off completely. This list by Gwen Godfrey took second at Frostbite GT, going 5 wins to 1 loss at a 48 player tournament. Hallowed Martyrs is the one where your units deal more damage, they get more damage themselves, but also have some nice things for characters such as reviving on death, which is quite a big one, particularly for Morven Val. And among other things, they also have that very tricky stratagem where you can force an enemy unit to pile all their attacks into one expendable thing to leave your big threat untouched. It looks like this small unit of 3 Arco-Flagellants might be good for that in this one. In the list though, we've still got the very scary Morven Val with a unit of 3 Paragon suits. They didn't really get too much worse, still monstrously dangerous if pretty pricey. There's Junith Arita for farming up some command points, and 2 Canonesses with Blessed Blades, one with Saint the Example and one with the Mantle of Ophelia. I guess the Saint the Example one is planning on getting herself martyred. The Mantle of Ophelia makes them a fair bit tougher, and the Palatine has Through Suffering Strength, which is the one that potentially can add a bunch of damage, and that's really quite brutal along with her Mortal Wound thing. It looks like one of those will be heading up the Celestian Sacrosancts, maybe a couple riding along with the Battle Sister squads inside the 2 Immolators, unless there's any character shenanigans going on with them being run solo to maybe use the fun character or you must fight me style stratagems. Interesting to see the Sacrosancts here as well. They were one of the slightly lesser played units before. They take some halberds and a spear here. Otherwise, there's an infiltrating unit of Sisters Novitiates which can hold the midboard, a big unit of 10 Arco-Flagellants that should be able to blend enemy infantry that try and press up too fast, that small one to take the hits no doubt, and then a trio of Holy Firepower and 3 Castigators, 2 with battle cannons and 1 with the auto cannons. Interesting to see a mix here. I've seen the vast majority of people run the battle cannons, but they can soup up other firepower with their AP thing. In any case, good to see someone still doing well with Sisters despite the lack of miracle dice these days. I certainly wouldn't be too surprised to see more people pivoting to Hallowed Martyrs though. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Titan's Terrain, one of the many different third-party options that can do a table for a 40k terrain. Their system works a fair bit differently to most though. Basically the idea is that you have 12 tiles arranged in a grid like this, and then each of them are basically cardboard tiles that fold flat, and when you unfold them up pops a building, so you basically have an instant deploy battlefield, all painted up and ready to go. The biggest draw basically being that there's pretty much no other terrain set that folds down that small and then pops up that quickly. So perhaps best suited if you're having to take some terrain along with you but you don't have enough space, or you have limited space at home, so you could potentially have a battlefield that stores in a box the same size as a regular board game or something, and then you can get it out when needed and collapse it away again. In any case, there'll be links down in the video description, and I'll cycle back to them again at the end of the video just to talk through a few of their different specific terrain sets. They've got a number of different styles of them, all done in different colours and things. But in any case, feel free to check them out if you're interested, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. Moving on, and next up we have the Admech. The list I saw for them was this Skitarii Hunter cohort, and this was played by a Harley Scully, using it to take 6th at Saffron Slam, going 4 wins to 1 loss in a 32-player tournament. The Hunter cohort has generally been their most competitive detachment prior to Grotmas. I feel like the Halo Screed one is genuinely interesting as a competitor though. It gives your Skitarii a bunch of stealth and cover and things, plus some nice reactive stratagems like a 5+ Feel No Pain, the option to return to reserves which is rather nice for Tabaxi, and some really quite good enhancements. There's a couple of them on the Marshals here with a Cantic Thrownet for the option to throw more Doctriners around, and a Battle Sphere uplink allowing their squads to move, shoot, move. They'll either be joining the Vanguard or Rangers. I guess maybe the move, shoot, move one might go along with the Rangers quite well. And one of the squads gets to ride in a Scorpius Dune Rider, being quite a nice way to get them out and then get full rerolls to hit and wounds between that and the Marshal buffs. Otherwise for the HQ section there's a Sidonian Scatros as a nice cheap lone operative, not doing loads of damage but he doesn't really have to, and a Techno-Archaeologist that can deny Deep Strike. I guess he'd probably be run solo to stop the enemy dropping anywhere near the home objective. Then for other Skitarii nastiness there's 25 Taraxi, 3 units of 5 Skystalkers, which are pretty godly for doing secondary objectives. They can deep strike and return to reserves and move really fast when they're on the board as well. And then a big unit of 10 Sterilizers. There's really quite a good choice for a bunch of the different stratagems and can hit really quite hard, particularly with the extra AP Doctriner when they're frying things on objectives and coordinating with battle line. Then there's 3 units of Sicarian Infiltrators to skirmish for the midboard, loads of attacks and hits coming out of them with the Taser Goats. And then to back all of that up, there's a serious amount of firepower, no less than 3 Scorpius Disintegrators that are going to be harder to kill in this detachment. They take the Ferromite Cannons and are just fairly nice general purpose shooting. And then 2 units of 2 Iron Striders with the Las Cannons, a little bit pricier than they used to be, though still nice and effective. Overall looks like a solid example of the Hunter cohort. Next up, and for the Knights of Titan, we have the first new Grotmus detachment. Ben Greenlay used the Warpbane Task Force to place second at LVO Can't Go, a 36-player grand tournament, with 4 wins and just the 1 loss. This one's the interesting sort of Zones of Control and Purifier style detachment that had people really quite excited by the big rerolls to hit that you can get out of them, which did seem particularly nasty. Applies to Dread Knights on paper, allowing you to reroll all misses, so they're going to have some pretty spectacular shooting. They do have a few other fun stratagems for some reroll wounds, handing out mortal wounds in a few different ways, and a 4+ invulnerable save. The interesting thing for this one is that there's 4 Dread Knights, all with hammers and psi cannons, but rather than taking the incinerators that most of the rest of them tend to, instead they've gone for silencers. I guess maybe tipping the balance a bit there. We know that you're likely to have more hits than shots most of the time, and you have 12 shots to start with. I still think it's maybe kind of close and has a bit of a trade-off here, though it does have some slightly longer range. Otherwise, there's also Captain Stern here as well. It looks like he's just running solo as a sort of annoying action style unit. He's got one of those rules to allow him to revive on death, so it usually takes a little bit of time to bring him down. And a Tech Marine as well, which would be nice enough to support the Dread Knights, and still at least a somewhat fighty character as well. Then there's 2 units of Purifiers, each of which are taking 2 Incinerators. I'd guess they might be played kind of carefully to allow you to push out that guaranteed bubble into the midboard, and they'd be able to keep the Dread Knights with their rerolls. There's then a unit of the fast-moving Interceptors and a Strike Squad with an Incinerator. That'd be nice for marking the home objective and then moving on. Finally, there's also 2 Armiger Helverins, each of which take some autocannons and a melter gun. Interesting to see them there, but I guess they're going for armor overload between that and the Dread Knight, so you don't know what to shoot. They certainly got cheaper as well, down to 130 points, and perhaps the most interesting one is a Grey Knight Land Raider. I'm honestly a little bit unsure as to if that's trying to transport anything. I guess you could put Purifiers in it and have them deploy somewhere from safety and then get the bubble of the rerolls. But I guess it's also perhaps making the cut in this detachment, given that you've got all those las cannons with 4 rerolls to hit on them. That certainly wouldn't hurt. I guess it'd be quite a nice option for the Tech Marine to boost as well. In any case, it looks like heavily armoured and Dread Knight Heavy Grey Knights have done well here. Certainly pretty encouraging for the new detachment having some strength, particularly after the teleport force was nerfed a bit in the data slate. Next up, despite a flurry of nerfs, the Astra Militarum still seem to be doing rather well at the top of a bunch of tournaments. Lots of high placings, though in particular they managed to win, I think it was the 2nd biggest event since the balance update. Jack Murphy managed to take first at the Everwinter Winter Assault Major, going 5-0 in a 71-player tournament and using the new Bridgehead Strike Grotmus detachment, the one that's flavoured around infantry squads and scions. The detachment gives you reroll all hits of 1 for Astra Militarum infantry in general, though it does come at the expense of Born Soldiers with those lethal hits against non-vehicle things, and then Tempestus units get a +1 to wound when they turn up from reserves or jump out of a vehicle. On top of that, they've got some fairly nice enhancements for the command squads. There's a couple here with the Bombast Vox Array, giving you a bunch of different orders all at once, and one with a Shroud Projector, meaning that the squad can't be overwatched, so you can put some Scions down even if something had a whole bunch of Flamers nearby. Otherwise though, just in general, Tempestus Scions do hit really hard out of reserve. Guard can really stack a lot of buffs on them. And with the command squad against an objective, they could be re-rolling all hits with sustained hits 1 and then +1 to wound from the detachment rule, and also potentially having an order thrown in there as well. The command squads are leading 4 Tempestus Scion units. The command squads are mainly taking fairly maximal special weapons, grenade launcher, melter gun, plasma gun and hotshot volley gun, and then the regular Scion squads are mainly taking melter guns and plasma guns. The Bombast Vox one has a Master Vox. In any case, they should be hitting pretty hard and can make great use of the detachment stratagems as well. Things like close range drops and return to reserves, and potentially infantry units can strip cover from things too. Beyond that, there's also a unit of Tempestus Aquilons, yet more dropping goodness, and they get the 6-inch deep strike built in, so they might be able to be a bit better for doing certain secondaries and things. There's 2 big blocks of Deathcore of Krieg, each headed up by a Marshal for the 5+ Feel No Pain. They should be good to hold the centre of the board and force the opponents to commit something big to destroy them. There's 3 units of Kazakin able to scout up, and it looks like they're going on foot. They're taking melter guns and plasma guns with a sniper and a melter mine in each of them. They can deal really quite a lot of damage, and it seems that Ursula Creed is around to give them orders, I guess running with that Cadian Shock Troop squad. Then we've got 2 units of scouting Kaschan jungle fighters with flamers. They'd be nice to have in the first rank for board control and blocking things up. Gaunt's Ghost to go up and down and score objectives, Sly Marbo for a cheap lone operative, and a Cyclops demolition vehicle for a nice cheap 25 points and can potentially turn up from reserves and do secondaries and things if needed. Overall, it's a fairly horde-style guard list. 80 stormtroopers in carapace armour, and then another 70 regular guardsmen with some really quite good support, though with the detachment rules and stratagems, loads of those squads can hit really hard at close range. Overall, really cool to see the list doing well and placing highly at the top of a tournament. I do feel like you could do other things with it as well, such as go for a bit more of a hybrid approach and play with lots of silence supporting a tank line perhaps. Next up, and for the Adeptus Custodes, it's another Grotmus detachment in their Solar Spearhead. This one played by Folder Piles, who unexpectedly managed to win the World Champions of Warhammer with a fairly middling looking Custodes. It looks like he's back going undefeated, this time with the Solar Spearhead, placing third at that Glass City GT with 5 wins and no losses. It does look like the Solar Spearhead does enough to make itself work. Your vehicles get extra objective control until they're damaged, and then they get damage buffs, and the Dreadnoughts get an extra plus 2-inch movement and boosted advance and charge rolls, and are able to take enhancements as well. For the stratagems, there's a few damage and defensive ones, but some nice mobility ones too, with the ability to walk through walls and either advance and shoot or advance, shoot and charge. As a result, it's maybe not too surprising that the majority of list is vehicles, and really quite sturdy vehicles at that. 3 Telemann heavy dreadnoughts, armed with their close combat weapon and plasma projector, their bolt launcher, and then the Arachnus storm cannon. One of them taking the Augury uplink, which gives the bearer a 5+ feel no pain, which did seem absolutely auto-include at first impressions with that detachment. The regular Telemons are very tanky indeed, and this one just makes one of them kind of obscene. Then there's 2 Caladius grav tanks, which are already staples elsewhere, so certainly makes sense in the detachment that supports the vehicles. But perhaps the most interesting thing is 3 Venerable Contemptor dreadnoughts, the regular Codex ones with the multi-melters. It does seem there's enough in the detachment to make them interesting and the go-to choice over the Forge World ones apparently. That really is pretty cool to see. I guess between that and the Telemons you would actually have a whole load of dreadnoughts that are sort of disturbingly hard to take down. The Telemann ones are just super durable full stop, and then the Venerable Contemptors are maybe a bit more killable, but also have the annoying habit of getting up on death. Might cause a bit of consternation there, even if the damage output of either of them compared with certain other things out there isn't exactly great. Otherwise though, to support them, there's 2 units of Prosecutors for some nice screening or doing grunt work on objectives, and then there's a Blade Champion with a squad of Custodian Wardens, always a good combo with the damage of the Blade Champions and his mobility, and the durability of the Wardens. And again, the other thing that maybe seemed borderline auto-include was that Adamantine Talisman, with +1 attack, strength and damage on the Blade Champion who already fights pretty hard. That's a very hard one to pass up for just how much damage he can mete out with Martial Qatar. In any case, cool to see this one go undefeated. People certainly were billing it as one of the stronger detachments. I was a bit uncertain whether or not it to be outcompeting Shield Host, though definitely seems to have been proved to be able to go all the way here with the existing datasheets. Next up, for some more big stompy robots, we've got the Imperial Knights. I think it's maybe a bit less surprising to see them not using their Grotmus detachment. The allied Admech one just doesn't really seem to practically work quite as well, even if the ability to ally a few of the units is kind of useful. In any case though, they did get some nice decreases in the balance update, with the Armiger Helverins and Warglaves both dropping 10 points for some reason. I guess in this list, enough points to pay for those Inquisitorial Agents. In any case, one of the best performing Imperial Knights lists in the latest Grand Tournaments was this one by Ronan, placing 5th at FWC Grand Tournament, with 4 wins to 1 loss in a 40-player event. In this one, there's the super fighty Canis Rex with his discounted stratagems, still very much a staple, even if he costs a bit more than most of the rest now. 2 Armiger Helverins for their nice long-range autocannon fire support, plus their good rerolls, and then 5 Armiger Warglaves, which are very cheap and efficient for their speed, damage and defense, a solid front line for the Imperial Knights. Perhaps the most interesting choice, though, is a pretty successful run-out for the Knight Gallant, the close combat version for the Imperial Knights, really quite savage in melee, though maybe not too hard to take down, and a little bit cheaper than some of his fellows. Cool to see him doing well. I feel like quite a lot of people choose to go for the Lancer instead of him. He's certainly scary enough with the smash through walls thing that he can have going on though. Really quite a long potential threat range, and maybe almost feeling a bit like a distraction Carnifex in the world of Knights. He also goes for the slightly pricey unyielding Paragon enhancement, which reduces AP of incoming attacks by 1, and that does give him a bit more protection in the fight phase compared with what they'd normally have. In any case, lots of scary damage there, loads of cheap Warglaves to fight for the objectives, and 2 absolutely enormous melee threats in Canis and the Gallant. There's also those Inquisitorial Agents for a nice cheap objective grabber or action doer, plus a Calidus Assassin to jump on and off the board doing secondaries. For the Imperial Agents, they haven't had quite as much success as the majority of armies out there, their codex being pretty underpowered. This list I think was slightly before the balanced data slates, but I think it was the only time that they've gone undefeated at a grand tournament, and Games Workshop didn't exactly give them any changes to help them out in the balance update for some reason. In any case, it seems to have worked out okay for Alexander Zelonkin, who placed second at this Hyper 331 GT. going 4 wins, no losses and 1 draw in a 32-player event, with a pretty interesting mixed list with 4 of the assassins no less, plays with the Imperialis fleet detachment, which has a good amount of movement tricks and a fairly nice core damage buff as the main rule. You can do things like deep striking navy breaches with, I think it's the combat landers enhancement, and some nice reactive move style things. In the list it looks like there's a Watchmaster with a Deathwatch kill team. They look like they're getting into the fight in a Corvus Blackstar, so that could potentially have them jump out and lay down a bunch of firepower right from turn 1, or set up somewhere aggressive. They could be a nice option to do that reactive move and 4+ invulnerable stratagem. There's a unit of 5 Grey Knight Terminators with an Incinerator, another one of the better damage dealers and can do okay against one objective. They make better use than most of the damage dealer stratagem there. Maybe could be an alright choice for rapid ingress perhaps. 2 units of Navy Breaches, which I'm not sure whether or not they'd have those Rogue Trader entourages attached. It looks like some of them might be deep striking given that enhancement, though it is kind of interesting that you can have such a massive unit just infiltrate into the midboard if you want to, and potentially block off a whole bunch of enemy scout moves and infiltrators, and maybe even first turn movement if you go first. Otherwise could be used as deep strikers for actions and objectives and things, and the Navy Breaches do have a fair bit of OC as well. Then there's 2 big units of 12 Inquisitorial Agents. They take multi-melter on the Servitors and all the free upgrades. Looks like one of them's running with Inquisitor Draxus and one with Inquisitor Greyfax maybe. They at least give you a fair bit of annoying chaff to put on mid-board objectives. And then it seems that there's just 1 Inquisitor left with Psychic Gifts. I suppose they might just be running solo, or I guess in theory could join the Grey Knights if desired. Overall, definitely a pretty quirky and out there list. I feel like it's going to be a faction that's a lot more dependent on player skill than army lists these days, as it's generally going to be a bit of an uphill struggle. Really cool to see something that looks actually fairly fluffy and well balanced, with a good mix of the units, including some damage dealers, actually do well at a grand tournament, even if it does just have a whole load less damage and defense than a whole load of armies out there. Finally, for the Imperium, we've got the Divergent Space Marine chapters. First up, we've got some Champions of Rust for the Space Wolves. There certainly wasn't a lot of love for their Grotmus detachment, the Champions of Fenris, and this list was run by a Cone Klein, who used it to take 3rd at PNW Warlords LVO Prep GT. That was 4 wins to 1 loss at a 28-player tournament. The Champions of Rust can give you a Feel No Pain at base. I feel like that's often the most safe one, that you could go damage dealing if you wanted to, and then your characters can try and unlock other sagas as you go along, so they tend to run very character heavy. Interestingly enough, this one's going full on Thunderwolf spam. There's Logan Grimnar on foot, who can just be a cheap deep striking unit with a surprising amount of threat and generate some army-wide rerolls. But then the vast majority of the army list is the massive sort of Wolf Jail Thunderwolf. 3 battle leaders on Thunderwolf and 3 Wolf Lords on Thunderwolf. 2 each joined to 3 units of 6 Thunderwolves with the shields, for units that are just all around dangerous. The characters get the damage boost on the charge, they can reactive move, they get +1 to advance and charge I think it is, and pretty great targets for any stratagems you might want to put on them. The extra AP helps them out in the champions list I guess. Interesting to see them being run here though versus the Stormlance. Otherwise, for some nice objective support, there's 3 units of scouts, lots of good infiltration there and return to reserves, 1 cheap and expendable Invader ATV with a Gatling cannon, and then to be able to crack a few of the toughest targets, there's a couple of Vindicators, often seeming to be the go-to scary big damage and defense tank for the Marines these days. Moving on, and for the Blood Angels, we've got a Liberator Assault group list. This was run by Brad Chester, who used it to take 14th at the Glass City GT, going 4 wins to 1 loss at that big event. This one's definitely a very different Blood Angels list to most that I've seen out there, going full on multiple small unit Blood Angels. No Death Company and Sanguinary Guard, but instead a massive amount of Intercessors. And it looks like the motivation for that is so you're able to use the boosted Space Marine Oath of Moment, so you can get the rerolls to hit and +1 to wound on the go at the same time. I'm genuinely unsure if this was a deliberate move from Games Workshop. It definitely does come with a big trade-off not taking any of the faction-specific units, but does mean that you can have Oath of Moment plus the Divergent Detachment if you don't take anything other than generic Space Marine units. In any case though, it certainly looks pretty intimidating. There's 3 captains on foot with Power Fist, and also the Plasma Pistol as they're not the Blood Angels one, and 1 taking Rage Fueled Warrior for the enormous Smash Captain combo. With him and a unit of Assault Intercessors, they'd be able to kill just about anything in the game. It looks like they'd be joining 3 out of the 6 Assault Intercessor squads on foot, so all of those are going to hit extra hard on their go turn with big rerolls against things on the mid-board objectives, and the captains activating their +3 attacks thing. There really are a lot of Assault Intercessors here though, as there's 6 units of 5 of those, so a bunch more squads to leap on small enemy units as well, and this detachment with both Boosted Oath on 1 unit and the option to use the Red Rampage stratagem or another, they're going to be hitting things hard. Then there's a big unit of 6 aggressors with Flamestorm gauntlets. I'm not sure if it'd be them or the Eradicators taking a ride in the Repulsor. Looks like it'd be one or the other. I guess the aggressors with the Flamestorm gauntlets look like they'd hit extra hard with boosted Oath of Moment on the go. If they can shoot then fight, they've got a serious amount of damage against anything. There's 3 units of Jump Intercessors, again with Power Fist and Plasma Pistol, nice objective grabbers and very scary in this detachment. One of them looks like he's led by a Chaplain for a bit more punch. There's 3 units of 3 Eradicators, one of them with a multi-melter each. Again, maybe could go in the Repulsor or could be either hiding on the board or maybe 1 or 2 squads in strategic reserve. 1 unit of Reavers with knives and pistols, definitely looking a bit scarier in close combat now those knives actually have some AP. It's interesting that they interfere with enemy objective control now, which could be quite big on contesting the mid-board objectives. Cool to see them actually getting used in anger. If their melee is going to work anywhere as well, it's probably going to be here, hitting at strength 6, AP 1 en masse. Finally, there's a unit of scouts with bolt guns and a combi weapon lieutenant who can help with secondaries and screening and stuff, I suppose. In any case, really quite a cool and different take on Blood Angels. So many small units that can still really punch up when you give some big buffs to them. Kind of interesting to see such on-foot Space Marines as well. I guess they'll be trying to move up with a good use of advance and charge stratagems and things and stick to terrain before they jump on stuff. Next up we have the winning list of the single biggest tournament since the balance update, which is this Dark Angels list as a Vanguard Spearhead by Zachary Morales, placing first and going 5 wins undefeated in a 97 player tournament. Dark Angels Gladius felt like it had a little bit more disruption than before given that the fire discipline thing was nerfed, so maybe it did seem that Dark Angels players might start to experiment with other things a bit, that their codex detachments have generally been considered kind of weak for a while. Vanguard definitely feels like an interesting choice for them though. You can have an infiltrating Terminator unit, things are a bit harder to kill at long range, and they still have some interesting enough stratagems. This list feels like really quite a shooty one for Dark Angels perhaps, with maybe a bit more of some token melee units to help them out. For the big guns, which I guess will enjoy the stealth and cover, there's 2 Predator Destructors with las cannon sponsons, 2 Vindicators, and then a great big unit of Centurion Devastators with las cannons and missiles, often a staple in the Vanguard Spearhead, often with Uriel Ventris, but here they'll still be able to return to reserves, and then pop up at the side of the board to be able to gain lines of sight if that's going to make sense for them, judged at the end of the enemy turn. Then for some objective scoring things, there's 2 units of Scouts and 2 units of Jump Intercessors. Scouts get some slightly boosted stratagems here, and Jump Intercessors again could return to reserves if it made sense for secondary objective things. And then for a couple of big Dark Angels melee punches, there's Azrael with a squad of Inner Circle companions. People often like to run him in a cheap unit, but they do like his 4+ invulnerable save quite a lot, and quite enjoy his sustained hits to go with their lethal ones. That's going to be a unit that can blend the majority of things in a round of combat. Azrael provides his very nice command points as well for the cause. And then there's a unit of Deathwing Knights with a Terminator Librarian with Blade Driven Deep, and they'll be hitting hard with Maces of Absolution and a relic weapon on the champion, starting out a very scary threat, perhaps on a mid-board objective, and daring the enemy to get too close. Finally, there is a Tech Marine as well to support those vehicles. Overall, I feel like there's an interesting different take on the Dark Angels, and a pretty fun one to win the biggest event. For the Deathwatch, it looks like people have been enjoying putting them back on the table again. They got their redone Index and Black Spear detachment, plus the return of the Primaris kill teams, and they have some pretty interesting and threatening rules as well. There's some of those at play in this list by Jack Tide, who used it to take first at Saffron Slam with 5 wins and no losses. The list is definitely doing Deathwatch things in style, putting no less than 50 elite infantry on the board in 5 different kill teams, and then a few more supporting Space Marines in power armor on foot. First up, there's a big unit of Deathwatch veterans taking their heavy thunderhammers and some nice close range shooting with frag cannons. It looks like they're being run with the Watchmaster with the Beacon Angelus, allowing them a free rapid ingress, so hopefully they could set up somewhere threatening and then go on to move, shoot and charge something nearby after that. Then there's 2 big chunky Indomitor kill teams. They're the Gravis armoured ones, and even the regular heavy intercessors get some massively boosted bolters in that one. And on top of that you get 3 Eradicators, one with a multi-melter, and then there's 2 Boltstorm aggressors here as well. They can all get extra strength against the closest target, which is a big help for all of them. And they do seem like a pretty good target both for the return to reserves one and potentially the special issue ammunition style stratagems, where multiple different ones could be pretty brutal there. It feels like they'd be hard work to get rid of if they establish themselves on the mid-board objectives. Then there's 2 Talon Strike kill teams. They're the ones where you take 5 Jump Intercessors and then 5 Inceptors. The Inceptors here taking plasma weapons, so a pretty scary punch of big damage from the sky there. There's also a Jump Captain, which I guess would probably lead one of those. He'd be able to give them some free stratagems, and he also has the Tome of Ectoclades as well for double Oath of Moment on 1 turn. something that could also be pretty well enjoyed by the Stern Guard, given that they get their big rerolls against one target. Talking of the Stern Guard, I'd guess that they're being led by the Genestealer with Thief of Secrets. I did a video not so very long ago about just how punchy Stern Guard can be with full wound rerolls on the go, and it does look like a Genestealer with that enhancement will be absolutely monstrous against the Oath target there. That's going to be a huge amount of high strength damage 3 attacks with devastating wounds, and then re-rolling all hit and wound rolls with the Stern Guard special rule, never mind any shooting they do, and their own damage with their Power Fist and volume attacks. For the points investment, they can just hit horrendously hard against the Oath targets. Then finally, there's a unit of 5 Intercessors that can sticky the home objective and put out some good volume fire with those bolters. And then interestingly, 2 units of 5 Incursors, some cheap scouting infantry for some board control. They've got a little bit more AP in combat now, and can also give the kill teams a +1 to hit, which I'm sure they'll enjoy. Overall, really fun to see some use of those fancy new Primaris teams. It did seem nice on paper. It looks like Deathwatch are, as anticipated, pretty much back. It seems they can be tournament topping strong. Finally, for the Imperium and our flavours of Space Marines, we've got this Righteous Crusaders list as an example of when the Black Templars want to do Dreadnoughts, it seems. This one being run by Jeremy Capco, who used it to place 3rd at Winter Slaughter GT with 4 wins to 1 loss in a 27-player event. Again, this also seems to be an army list that has foregone any of the actual Black Templar units to just take generic Space Marine ones, and that way they both get their unique detachment for Righteous Crusaders and also +1 to wound Oath of Moment. In this list, there's a Terminator Ancient with 10 Houses Bones, and that will attach to a big squad of Assault Terminators, 10 of them with Thunderhammers and Storm Shields and 5+ Feel No Pains. They're going to be monstrously hard to remove, and in this detachment, their weapons can suddenly go anti-Psyker if they want, so she'll be able to beat some Demon Primarchs into the dirt. Then probably the other major damage feature is a massive amount of Stompy Dreadnoughts and big guns. 3 Redemptors with Macroplasma and Onslaught Gatling Cannon. They very much enjoy focusing down a +1 to wound Oath of Moment target. And there's also a Ballistas Dreadnought for some Last Cannon and missile fire, and then 2 Vindicators as well, just in case you needed a bit more anti-tank there. They're supported by a Tech Marine who takes Position's Edge, so he'll be unusually fighty if he does need to charge his way into the fray. Then there's a unit of 5 Infiltrators, maybe doing some deep strike denial on the home objective, 2 squads of Jump Intercessors, and 1 squad of Scouts. They should be able to handle some outlying enemy units and also score some secondaries. Overall, that does look quite intimidating for damage and defense, a 6+ Feel No Pain on all of that tanky Space Marine armor, and access to boosted +1 to wound Oath of Moment. It perhaps is a bit of a shame that it kind of discourages the Divergent chapters from running their unique units though, and I genuinely wouldn't be too surprised if Games Workshop tweak it and patch out these kind of lists in a future balance update, even if they do have some very real trade-offs. Into the realm of Chaos next, and the creations of Bile make another appearance. It seems that a bunch of Chaos players are having some good success with them, and Brenton Weiss used this to take 4th at Wild Hunt GT, the Battle for New Year's Day, with 4 wins and 1 loss in a 28-player tournament. The creations of Bile is the one where you can get 2 random but really quite impactful buffs on the army, or swap that out for choosing one of them, and then have a few useful melee support stratagems like Fight and Death and Advance and Charge, and a couple of other bits. Fabius Bile seems to be a staple on the list, given that he allows rerolls on that table to start with, and that's quite a big deal if you duplicate something or roll maybe the +1 ballistic skill, which is usually going to be less useful. Plus he can augment a squad as well, so I guess that'd be a very souped up unit of Chosen that he'd be leading. There's then a regular Demon Prince on foot. I guess he could give a little bit of cover to those Possessed moving up if he wanted, and then a Fighting Master of Executions with the Helm of All-Seeing, preventing enemies from turning up within 12 inches of him. I don't know if he might just be being run on his own as Deep Strike Denial and also being somewhat fighty. Feels like he could have been quite a fun choice for the Prime Test Subject one, even if that is quite expensive. In any case, it looks like Bile and the Chosen will be loading up in the Rhino to charge out of and destroy something, and then moving up the board alongside, there's 2 units of 10 Possessed. They'd really quite enjoy the Advance and Charge and pretty much most of the detachment buffs, plus they might be able to justify that big 4 wound rerolls type one. That could work very nicely with their devastating wounds. Otherwise, there's no less than 3 units of Warp Talons. Again, we'll enjoy the detachment buffs and stratagems, and I guess they might have a bit of option for killing a unit and then hiding again if they pick on something small enough. Could be quite nice to blend outlying enemy infantry, and maybe even return via rapid ingress if there were command points going spare. Finally, there's some big guns with a trio of Predator Destructors with Las Cannon sponsons, just general purpose scary stuff with Dark Pacts on the go, and 1 squad of allied Nurglings that could be good for screening or certain positional secondaries. It does seem that Chaos players are trying out their new detachment to some good success. I feel like it's quite fun to see big blocks of Possess back on the table with good incentive to run them. It seems a detachment like this was all they really needed. Next up, we've got the World Eaters and a Vessels of Wrath army list, this one being one of their Grotmas detachments, one that maybe felt like it was kind of roughly on par with their Index detachment, though a bit different and not really supporting Angron as well. Even if it did have some very good reliability on the Blessings of Khorne, you can potentially have some units triple up on Blessings, so potentially moving both very, very fast and hitting very hard at the same time. In any case, the fact that it focuses on non-epic hero characters isn't enough to dissuade them from using Angron and Lord Invocatus. That doesn't really feel like an enormous surprise. Angron's just really scary, and Lord Invocatus allows the big scout move things. Perhaps the coolest part of the list, though, is the 3 Demon Princes with wings, which are really quite rarely seen in World Eaters armies. Maybe a bit expensive for what they do, but this detachment does feel like it does better for them than the Index one does by quite a long way. One takes Arc Slaughterer for +1 damage to weapons when it's a Vessel of Wrath, one takes the Vox Diabolus, which gives you the chance to farm some command points, and one takes Gateways to Glory, which is the Smash Through Terrain one. That one in particular did seem very nice on a Demon Prince. Otherwise, there's a unit of 10 Jackals for some nice cheap sticky objectives and re-rolling blessings. 9 8-bands, 1 unit of 6 Exalted and 1 unit of 3 Exalted. Again, will be nice enough when juiced up with the Vessels. 1 cheap unit of 2 Chaos Spawn and then 2 Predator Destructors once again. Interesting enough this time actually going for heavy bolter sponsons. Looking like they're taking the role of a bit more dedicated anti-infantry, given that a bunch of the rest can break tough stuff quite well. I think the coolest thing about this list is the 3 Demon Princes. Really nice to see that the detachment can do well enough for them that they can place pretty high at a tournament. Next up, for the Sorceress Legion of Tzeentch, we've got the Thousand Sons, and since the balance updates, there was just the one tournament that seems to have gone rather well for them, placing both first and second. This list by TJ Lanigan was the one that won at 40k Winter Wars Hybrid GT. 5 wins to no losses at a 31 player event. This one just looks like fairly strong balanced Thousand Sons, maybe not doing too much differently from what they've done most of the edition. Magnus the Red has a great big linchpin for all the damage and a good focus for rituals and stratagems. Ahriman for a free ritual plus lightly a +1 to wound for some of those warp flamers. 2 Infernal Masters, one with the punchy arcane vortex, which makes him absolutely murderous to things, particularly on objectives, along with rubric warp flamers, and one with the umbralific crystal, which could be used to teleport battle line things into the enemy home board to try and do secret missions and things. 1 Exalted Sorcerer on disc with Lord of Forbidden Law for some extra ritual manipulation, maybe running solo, and 1 other regular sorcerer, I guess probably running solo once again. Then to back up all the scary psychic shenanigans and damage, there's a good amount of screening cultists and Zangors, 2 units of 10 cultists and 2 units of 3 enlightened with great bows, nice enough for screening and secondaries, and then not 1 but 2 Mutalith Vortex beasts, able to double the range on things like Doombolt, but just generally being fairly tough and fairly scary. A good number of wounds and potentially enough damage to one-shot certain enemy battle tanks on a very good roll, but good enough shooting against anything. Maybe not too surprising that the Thousand Sons might not be looking to change too much, which feels rather fitting with their rubric lore. They didn't really get any major changes in the balance update, and their Grotmas detachment was very badly received. Finally, for the Deity Legions, we've got a Plague Company of the Death Guard. Interestingly enough, not quite so many high placings for them in the first tournaments after the update, though I guess they'll probably rise up a bit and take some events in the next few weeks. They had been doing rather well at winning tournaments before the update and didn't really get any nerfs. It feels like they should be in at least a fairly good place to be one of the stronger factions in the game currently. In any case, for one example of a competitive list that they can put on the table, this list was by Ryan Schaum, who used it to take 4th at Hammer in the New Year GT, with 3 wins, 1 draw and 1 loss. In this one we've got the near auto-include Mortarion for his big tanky toughness and potentially ability to ignore modifiers and things. The excellent Typhus with his big mortal wounds, and it looks like he's leading up one of the units of Death Shroud, the other one being led by a sorcerer in Terminator armor. Then there's a Foul Blightspawn for some nice shooting and fights first, and a Biologist Putrefier for critical lethal hits and free grenades. They'll join a Plague Marine squad, and in general that's a massive damage combo that can clear out a whole bunch of things in the midboard, though interestingly it looks like it's getting there in a Death Guard Land Raider this time. The vast majority of people I've seen have used Rhinos for that. It certainly gets them there in style, with being able to move them out, drop them, and then allow them to charge after that, though it does cost a whole load more points of course. Then we've got 2 units of 10 Death Guard Cultists, nice, cheap and expendable for doing secondaries and screening, and then 3 Bloat Drones, 1 with a Flesh Mower and 2 with Plague Spitters, generally nice enough to act as fairly nice outriders, being able to move up and spread those contagions around. Finally, we've got a squad of 3 Nurglings, and then 2 of the cheap, effective and scary Wardog Carnivores, nice enough to be able to jump on an enemy heavy unit and deal enormous damage to it. Overall seems like a pretty solid Death Guard list, maybe not too enormously different from a bunch of other competitive ones. I'd say probably the biggest and most interesting thing is that Land Raider instead of the Rhinos, for some Premier delivery for the Plague Marines and a few las cannons thrown in. Next up, we've got the Chaos Knights, and this list by Kieran Trimby placed 5th at the LVO Can't Go, with 4 wins and 1 loss at a 36-player event. For the Chaos Knights, it's often been Wardog spam. This one's got 3 Wardog Stalkers, which went down a bit in the last balance update. They're taking the Demon Breath Spear Melter Guns, a Havoc Launcher, and the Slaughter Claw, so really quite punchy against heavies there, and one of them's taking the Lord of Dread and one the Traitor's Mark. The Lord of Dread I think went down a little bit last time round, and that hands out some battle shock in the fight phase. The Traitor's Mark was rewritten recently, and it means that in the movement phase you can make an enemy have to test battle shock within 12 inches of you. That could be a lot more impactful now that you get the army rule right from turn 1, so potentially that's a -1 to hit and a +1 to wound them. Otherwise it's the old reliable Wardog Brigand and Carnivore spam. Carnivores move really fast and hit incredibly hard in close combat, just very efficient at tearing anything apart that they get into, and then 4 Brigands being very accurate gun turrets hitting on a 2+ with a bunch of chain cannon and melter shots. They can potentially make some nice use of the sustained hits one for War Dogs as well. Finally, as is often the case, there's a unit of 10 Plague Bearers that can sticky some objectives and just provide a lot of tanky OC. And then a single Beast of Nurgle, which can maybe drop to do actions and things, and also is just unusually annoying to remove with the ability to ping back to full health if you half do the job. At this rate it probably looks like Chaos Knight Wardog spam is going to remain the way to play the army until the Codex comes out. The big knights didn't really get significant buffs in the last one, unless people start to try out their new detachment in earnest, if feeding in a whole bunch of cultists to a Despoiler or a Knight Tyrant or something is actually worth it. Finally for Chaos, and we've got the Demons, and this one is a new Grotmus detachment once again, with the Legion of Excess for Slaanesh Demons, perhaps one of the single most interesting ones after the rules were revealed. Absolutely enormous damage boosts with the core detachment rule, but coming at the price that you might take some major damage first, as you lose fights first on the charge when you trigger it. In any case, this army list, played by Joshua Minnick, used it to take 12th at the Glass City GT, with 4 wins just to 1 loss. In the army there's Be'lakor here to keep a whole bunch of the army safe from enemy shooting in the early game, and just the one Keeper of Secrets in this list interestingly enough, that one taking the Aegis and Sword, and it's the Soul Glutton one which I think is the Healing Wounds one. There's also the Contorted Epitome, which could be an interesting option to tank damage with the Take Mortal Wounds stratagem if you need one unit to just absolutely live this turn, and you're willing to spend the command points to keep something alive. Finally for the HQs there's a Torment Bringer on an Exalted Seeker Chariot which has the Dreaming Crown, and that one's the +1 to hit for non-monster units in a 6-inch aura around itself. That does make any Fiends or Demonettes and things just very nasty within its aura. A +1 to hit, also getting sustained hits, and also the ability to fight on death as well on a 4+, so extra damage when they're striking and still causing damage when they cut down too. Then to receive all those enormous damage buffs between those and the detachment stratagems, there's 2 units of 6 Fiends and then 1 unit of 3. That did seem on paper to be perhaps the best recipient of all those damage things given a fairly low strength but general purpose profile. There's 2 units of 5 Seekers which can be annoying scouts and block the enemy in when they need to, but also can hit unusually hard here as well of course. 1 unit of 10 Demonettes, 1 unit of 3 Nurglings for some cheap infiltrators, and 1 unit of 10 Plague Bearers for some sticky objectives. Finally there's a big chunky and scary Soul Grinder of Slaanesh as well. Some big scary damage stats here, and doesn't have some of the limitations that some of the things out there have, given that lots of things are said not for monsters, but it's not a monster, it's a vehicle. In any case, seems to be a pretty good time for Slaanesh. A couple of people seem to have had some success with this one, and I guess there's Emperor's Children on the way on the model release sort of front. Finally we get onto the Xenos armies, and first up for the Aeldari we have an Inari Battle Host here. This one played by Daniel Olivers, who used it to take 3rd at Frostbite GT, 5 wins to 1 loss and a 48 player attendance. The Aeldari are shortly to have some rules rewrites with their codex on the way, but until then they can still embrace the big damage rerolls of their codex. Inari have often been pretty popular. This one's doing really quite a lot of fun and fluffy things with them, with both Ivrain, the Vizarch and the Incarn, so the full triumvirate of Iniad on the board. I'd guess Ivrain and the Vizarch perhaps attached to the Harlequin troop. There's a small unit of 6 of them, and that can be an unusually fighty squad with fights first. Definitely very fragile and high investment though. The Incarn can deal some good damage and potentially warp around the board with its respawn to the Death unit location. There's Illic Knight Spear that can give a unit of Rangers lone operatives. That's a pretty interesting and hard to remove units that can actually be a big threat to characters at range. There's a Farseer with a Singing Spear, which I'd guess will be running with the Guardian Defenders. They can rustle up some extra Fate dice, and then the Farseer can plug some automatic 6s into something. Maybe it could be nice enough with a Night Spinner to get some automatic devastating wounds. The Night Spinner can also slow down some units too. Or could be handy enough on the Haywire Cannons of the Void Weavers if you want to punch through some automatic devastating wounds, or even with Illic himself. There's also a Farseer Skyrunner as well with Fate's Messenger, so potentially another source of those automatic 6s elsewhere. And between the two they can be guiding some units and protecting others. Maybe a -1 to wound on the Incarn could be particularly good. Finally, they've also got some allied Drukhari. It looks like one unit of Cabalite warriors split in half with the Venom, and that means that you can have the sticky objectives rule in multiple places, so they'd be quite nice expendable units to fly around, plus Venoms with Cabalite warriors are quite nice for using that Bladestorm stratagem. Finally, there's 2 units of Mandrakes as well, all very handy for some infiltrate shenanigans, and then fading away around the board to do secondary objectives later. Overall, it's an interesting and pretty character-heavy Aeldari list. Loads of units that just really aren't all that tough to take down individually, but potentially if the opponent tries to move towards them and expose too much, they can get hit back incredibly hard. Seems like Inari is still doing well enough at the moment. It'll be interesting to see how they carry on when the new Codex comes out. They'll get their own detachment there. Next up, and for the Drukhari, we've got some more Aeldari allies. The Drukhari maybe didn't do so great out of the balance update, being an army that was considered kind of mid-tier at best before, and then getting a few further nerfs, in particular to Scourges, felt kind of painful. It looks like someone's had some okay success with the Reaper's Wager detachment though, going 4 wins, Wyatt Harris going 4 wins to 2 losses at the Frostbite GT. And it's just kind of cool to see the new detachment in play. I did kind of suspect that it could be pretty credible to go really quite light on the Harlequin units in it, and then mainly focus on giving lots of rerolls to the Drukhari as much as possible, and then just take some Harlequins to maybe be able to flip things back from time to time. And when the damage rerolls do flip to them, it means they will be unusually dangerous in the fight phase. In any case, going through the HQ section, we've got an Archon with Arc Raider. That's the one that can allow you to flip the rerolls back to the Drukhari at the expense of a pain token, and basically until something dies you get army-wide reroll 1s to hit and wound, which is pretty meaningful. There's a Beastmaster that can scout out and do first turn charging or move block annoyance if you want to. Lilith Hesperax with a unit of witches that look like they'd be charging out of a raider. There's lots of good melee stratagems for the detachment too, including advance and charge. A quarter of the Archon to go with that Archon, I guess maybe bodyguarding him while he's using the Arc Raider. And some Cabalite warriors to fill out a couple of Venoms for running around and securing objectives. There's then Urian Rakarth, who looks like he might be running with the Talos. He can potentially heal 3 wounds a turn, and he's fairly credible to run on his own if you want to, given that he can get up on death, and it's quite tough. The Talos can provide a good bit of muscle to the army. They've got Haywire Cannons and Liquefire Gauntlets, and there's also a unit of 3 Grotesques moving up as well, again with Liquefire and monstrous weapons. There's 2 units of Scourges with Dark Lances, which I guess would really quite enjoy the reroll 1s to hit and wound all the time. And lastly for the Drukhari, there's a Kronos Parasite engine, massively tough and tanky, and farm some pain tokens when you use them. Finally, that just leaves us with the Harlequins, the Troop Master with the Reaper's Cowl. That's the one that gives the big 12-man Harlequin troop stealth and infiltrators, which did seem like it was one of the scary things that you could do a big alpha strike with if you wanted. They could easily be getting first turn charges with a good manner of buffs from the stratagems, maybe with reroll 1s to hit and wound as well. Definitely feels like a bit of a double-edged sword though, given that they could be targeted and exposed and destroyed a bit easier if they're in the midboard. Lastly, there's a Solitaire as well. He can move extra fast in the turn that he blitzes, and could be a good unit to wipe out certain enemy units or characters, maybe be another option to flip the rerolls back to the Drukhari if it made sense to in the fight phase. In any case though, really fun to see the Reaper's Wager in a tournament list and taking a fair few wins. I guess just due to model collection requirements it might not be all that dominant for the Drukhari players, but will be interesting to see its success against the other detachments that they have. Next up, and for the Tyranids, it was fun to see that the Assimilation Swarmers had an undefeated run. This list by Samuel Pope took second at the Everwinter Winter Assault GT, with 5 wins and no losses in a 71 player event. The Assimilation Swarm got a couple of buffs in the last balance update, the one where you get to regrow Tyranid units, the Harvester units feeding into them. Now the Harvester units don't have to be on an objective to start healing nearby Tyranids. If you heal big single models, then you get D3 plus 1 wounds back rather than just D3, and also the Norn Assimilator as well also got Harvester, and there's certainly one of those here which is fun. People haven't been using them too much, but I guess it maybe tips the balance with them going down in points costs a bit, and also getting basically a built-in D3 plus 1 wound restoration each turn if you want it. The rest of the detachment does have some other interesting stuff, a few other ways that you can trigger yet more healing, or potentially mark things for revenge when a harvester unit gets slain. Leading the list, there's a pair of characters, a Tervigon with Styling Talons and Biophagic Flow. That allows nearby harvester units to regenerate models that are within 9 inches of them rather than 6, so a bit more range there, and the Tervigon will be supporting all those termagants as well, giving them some nice lethal hits with their spine fists, and helping replenish the swarm with a bunch of healing on those. Given that we're talking about them, the other big feature of the list is that there's 4 units of 20 termagants here, all with spine fists and strangle webs, so loads of reactive move objective control there. And it seems that part of the idea is at least that you could be healing them in a pretty major way with that Tervigon, restoring lots of models to the squad with that, and then also potentially healing them with the whole assimilation swarm healing thing. If you're not able to completely wipe out the squads, they could ping back to at least a good amount of full health. Joining the Tervigon in the character slot, there's also a Hive Tyrant with wings and instinctive defense. He's armed with a bone sword, so is fairly fighty, can hand out stratagems for free to things nearby, and the enhancement allows him to free heroic intervene when he's near harvester units, and also get fights first as well, so it means that you could have him step into combat and then hit before the enemy. Then beyond that, getting onto the actual harvester units, there's one Lonely Pyrovore. I guess maybe you could play tag team with the Tervigon to put his boosts elsewhere. One Lonely Ripper Swarm as well. I don't know whether that will be starting on the board or deep striking somewhere. 2 Psychophages, which would be able to push out their Feel No Pain to things nearby. Again, at least one of those feels like a good idea to go alongside that Tervigon and make it harder to kill. Plus that'll mean that the Termagants all get a 6+ Feel No Pain as well. And then as mentioned, there's that big scary Norn Assimilator, a unit that's got some serious anti-tank damage, and feels like it probably gets into the realm where it's tough enough, where it gets the 6+ Feel No Pain not on its midfield objective, potentially goes up to the 4+ Feel No Pain if it does, and also starts to regenerate itself. And there are a few ways to manipulate that regeneration. There's also a unit of 10 Hormagaunts that can add further to the whole horde thing, and maybe just swarm towards and flip an objective for a turn. 1 unit of Venomthropes, which it looks like between that and the Psychophage, those termagants are going to be kind of annoying to kill, -1 to hit and in cover. A 6+ Feel No Pain, and then the squad regrows at a disturbing rate once they get damaged. There's a Biovore that can spawn out some Spore Mines for board control, often a very easy take in just about any Tyranid list right now, and then finally to actually provide some big scary firepower, particularly against elite infantry, there's a trio of Exocrines, and their Bioplasma should be able to light up some Space Marines or anything with 3 wounds. Overall, a fair bit going on with that one. I guess the Termagants would be getting all over the mid-board objectives and putting loads of OC there, being really annoying to remove and then regrowing at a fast rate, all while there's a few bigger bugs that are kind of annoying to kill between Venomthropes and Pyrovores and regeneration, and a bunch of Exocrines firing away with a bunch of damage at the back. Feels like Assimilation Swarm might be back on the menu in a big way. It had been kind of neglected compared with most of the other Tyranid detachments before now. Next up, we've got some Genestealer Cultists, and in this one there's a Biosanctic Brood Surge that topped a grand tournament, this one by Larkin, who used it to win FWC GT, with 5 wins to none at a 40-player event. I really wouldn't be too surprised if Genestealer Cults continue to do very well despite the changes to them. By the tournament stats, they seem to be 40k's strongest faction by a good margin on the past update, maybe just with Guard rivaling them. While they did get nerfs, none of them really felt like they were unbearable, and I still expect them to be really strong. Biosanctic Brood Surge is the one that gives you big melee buffs when things charge into combat, in particular Aberrants, Pure Strains, and anything with a Biophagus. It was maybe nerfed a bit specifically with Abominants going up by a big 20 points. That still doesn't seem to have been enough to stop them being taken here. There's still 2 of them, and one of them with Predatory Instincts, so that means that from turn 1 you can park a massive unit of Aberrants right in the midboard. And they've both got a big scary unit of 10 of them to lead. Otherwise there's a Biophagus, which I guess will be running with the big unit of 10 Acolytes, with auto pistols and their 6 mining tools, lethal hits, and the detachment rules on that kind of unit seems rather scary. And there's also a Primus as well. I'm a little bit less certain where he's going, maybe with the small squad of 10 Neophytes, or perhaps he could be going with the Acolytes, a Biophagus with the Aberrants, and one of the Abominants running solo. In any case, other than the big damage punches of the Aberrants, there's a unit of 10 Pure Strain Genestealers, lots and lots of very accurate and nicely high AP volume attacks there, plus this attachment can give them extra attacks. Besides the 10 squad of Acolytes, there's 2 units of 5 with auto pistols and mining tools, and then 1 unit of 5 with the Hand Flamers. and then one unit of neophytes with their special weapons. Between those you can get sticky objectives, farming command points, and just a few other cheap units to do secondaries as well. The small units of acolytes are quite efficient for recycling with the cult ambush points now. They perhaps do seem like some of the best bang for the buck there. Finally, for vehicles, there's a Goliath truck, which could be good for getting some of the infantry to melee, and then 3 Achilles Ridge Runners, which still felt great after the points increase. They went up to 85 points. There's one with a mortar and spotter. The other two look like they were just declared with a spotter, so I'd guess maybe they're armed with mining lasers. In any case, still looks like new style Genestealer Cult. It's well capable of topping tournaments. Biosantic Brood Surge was certainly strong before, with all of its easy ways to get things to combat and then hit quite hard when you get there, and it still looks like it will be now. Next up for the Xenos, we've got the Tau Empire Auxiliary Cadre, another one of the Grotmus detachments that looks more interesting. It looks like it's topped a small grand tournament run by Donald Plummer, who won an LVO Prep GT with 5 wins to no losses and 28 players in attendance. The Grotmus Auxiliary one can allow Kroot and Vespid units to give you extra AP on your Tau guns if they can get close to the targets, or the Tau can give can't shoot me at 18 inches to the auxiliary units near them. On top of that, there's a bunch of great stratagems, a lot of which feel rather nice for rampagers but can just amp up auxiliary damage in general. Plus a really scary shooting one for the Tau, which you can get boosted up to +2 strength on your weapons, which feels quite nice for things like iron hammerheads, and a rather good fallback and shoot one as well, which is just handy for shooting units full stop. In any case, going in with those rules, there's Shadow Sun, who can grant her reroll 1s to hit for anything, and maybe do a bit of command point farming between her and an Ethereal as well. It does feel like this detachment is really quite a thirsty one for command points. There's a Cold Star Commander who takes some missile pods, the high output burst cannon and a cyclic ion blaster. He's joining a Fire Knife team that takes a whole bunch of missile pods. I guess they'd also enjoy the extra AP and potentially more strength, and should be able to put out some consistent and scary firepower. Finally, there's a Firesight Marksman who takes Admired Leader. I guess he's a lone operative that can give Kroot units kind of pseudo-lone operative, and he hands out +1 objective control and +1 leadership to nearby Kroot or Vespid units. Kind of interesting that one was considering to be worth made the cut. I did feel like maybe it was a bit on the lower value side, but I guess you could be sending out waves of really quite high objective control Kroot things to flip mid-board objectives. Certainly for the Carnivore squads you'd have loads of OC there. Talking of the auxiliaries, there's 2 units of 10 Kroot Carnivores with their sticky objectives, 3 units of Vespid Stingwings which can be jumping on and off the board if they need to. Those neutron blasters can make good use of a couple of the stratagems if it makes sense to. There's then 2 units of 3 Krootox Rampagers, which even with 3 of them can still be tuned up to some pretty scary damage with this detachment, and 1 unit of 5 Kroot Hounds. I guess that in general the auxiliaries might be mainly playing support for the Tau, going out in waves to trigger the detachment rules and then being sacrificed. Then to back them up and those deep striking crisis suits, there's a bunch of Pathfinders with ion rifles that can do a bit of marking, but also just shoot very hard in their own right. 2 units of 3 stealth suits with their big rerolls to hit and wound. It looks like those will be spotting for a couple of broadsides with rail rifles and seeker missiles, a ghost kill battle suit with an ion raker, really quite a lot of lone operative in this one, 2 hammerheads with the ion cannons, and then a sky ray with burst cannons. Overall just some fairly nice general purpose shooting. A lot of it will enjoy the extra AP, and potentially being able to drop back from combat and still shoot when they want to. Overall definitely feels like a list with a whole bunch of options, loads of chaff units for doing secondaries and things while they're triggering the detachment rule, and a fair bit of scary firepower to back them up. Next up for the Necrons, and as anticipated they do seem to be doing rather well post-update, and it does indeed seem that the Star Shatter arsenal can deliver the goods as well as it looked on paper. This list by Jonas Beardsley took first at a 48-player grand tournament, going 5 wins undefeated. I feel like just from the way that the detachment was set up, with the assault rule for vehicle units, lots of interesting support stratagems for them, including moving away when you get attacked and being able to smash through walls and things, plus just some very big nice general purpose damage buffs against things on objectives. It was in a good place for success. Maybe the most obvious thing to do looks like the Silent King with the -1 damage enhancement, which between that and the -1 to wound stratagem just feels like you're very unlikely to bring Zarek down at all. Then potentially you can double heal him for 4 wounds a time with a Canoptek Reanimator, again with another stratagem if you really want to ping him back to full health. It's kind of hard to just ignore the Silent King as well, with massive great big anti-tank weapons and a whole bunch of range and melee fire beyond that. It also provides rerolls to the rest of the list. Then the other most obvious thing was a trio of Doomsday Arcs, already great firepower, and they didn't get any worse, and this detachment seems to be maybe one of the best for supporting them. They'll certainly enjoy the Silent King's rerolls as well. It looks like handing out the enhancements to them. There's 2 Hexmark Destroyers. They'll be lone operatives, so hard to kill, one with Demanding Leader to allow them to fall back and shoot, and one with a -1 damage enhancement likely for Zarek. Then with that very scary core of the army, there's 2 units of Scorpec Destroyers for blending some elite infantry on objectives, one very scary unit of 3 Locust Heavy Destroyers with Enmity Exterminators, they should make short work of a bunch of hordes, one unit of 3 Tomb Blades that can use the detachment rules rather well, one unit of Infiltrating Flayed Ones to put some presence on the mid-board objectives, 2 individual Locust Destroyers which could be used for secondaries and screening, and 1 Canoptek Spider. I guess just adding yet another layer of defense to the whole central castle with a 6+ Feel No Pain for Zarek and friends. As mentioned, there's that Canoptek Reanimator to allow you to spend 1 command point to heal for around about 4 wounds or so, and then a Triarch Stalker as well, which I guess is fine enough in Necron shooting lists. It allows you to strip cover from a target if you just wanted yet more damage with all of that firepower. He's got a Heat Ray for either the Melter shots or the Flamer type thing. Overall, all looks very scary. I feel like this definitely feels like one of the lists to beat at the moment. Just loads of raw power and defense, and a lot of great supporting stratagems to give people a hard time when they're going up against it. Next up, we've got the Greenskins, and we've got an Orc Warhorde. This one was used by Jack Sayer to place 3rd at Saffron Slam with 4 wins and 1 loss. Warhorde's been the most easy and violent detachment to use for a while, though I feel like a few people are certainly experimenting with the Tactical Brigade. Nice easy sustained hits with damage, and good things like -1 to wound from stratagems, or extra boosted damage, or easier ways to get to combat. Orcs definitely got a good buff in the last update, being able to declare the war in your command phase as opposed to the start of the battle round, so your opponent might be kept a bit more guessing as to when you're going to trigger it. Leading the detachment is Ghazghkull Thraka himself, who with Makari can give you some critical hits with sustained and lethal hits on a 5+ for a turn. Crazy damage in the war and good stats beyond that, and is joined by 3 Mega Knobs as cheerleaders that activate as rerolls. There's a war boss with Follow Me Lads to help people get to combat super speedy. Looks like he'll be going with a squad of 10 knobs in a truck. Again, that should be enough general purpose damage to take out the vast majority of things in the game. And Zogrod Wartsnagger joins them in the character section with his big squad of 20 super runs. That's just a big annoying squad of Gretchen to gum up a mid-board objective for a turn or 2 and hopefully nab it for the Orcs. Then for the lot of the rest of the list, it looks like a massive amount of dangerous greenskins crammed into another 3 trucks. It's really cool to see the Breaker Boys, which are the melee tank busters. They're going in with smash hammers and a single tank hammer each. They do have genuinely really quite strong stats against monsters and vehicles, and point for point they do hit harder than knobs there. And the damage 3 certainly isn't bad against Terminator equivalents as well. The main trade-off is that they're just not really quite as tough and fairly easy to kill for the points. Along with them, it looks like the rest of the trucks are filled by small squads of shooty guys, 1 squad of burner boys with a custom mega blaster, and 3 squads of flash kits, which are just general purpose quite dangerous shooting and then melee, good at clearing out medium to lighter infantry. Finally, there's a really good amount of objective support things as well, 3 units of 5 storm boys for secondary objectives and charging very far, 2 units of 10 Gretchen for command point farming and screening and objective grabbing, and then interestingly a shock jump dragster. That one's able to do some teleport things and maybe just warp to a place on the board where you need to do a secondary objective provided there's enough room for it to land. It's really good fun to see the new datasheet in play and being fairly successful. Those Breaker Boys did look pretty dangerous on paper. Finally, we have the Leagues of Votann, and maybe in a bit of an opposite turn from the last balance update. They've had a slightly weaker tournament weekend as opposed to a super strong one just after the October one came out. I struggled a bit to find a top placing list, though this one placed 19th at Glass City GT, which was a really big one. I still went 3 wins, 1 loss and 1 draw, played by Gabriel Baumann. This one's very heavily mechanised Votann. We've got no less than 6 Sagitors with 5 high-las beam cannons and 1 set of missiles, and then 2 land fortresses with the conversion beamers and scanners. So a very scary amount of heavy-hitting anti-tank fire plus a bunch of bolt cannons to clear out your judgment marked units. The Sagitors look like they're splitting the Hearthkin Warriors in 2, plus having a couple of units of Chthonian Berserks. I guess one of the split squads of Hearthkin will probably stay behind on the home board objective to mark that for their sticky objectives, and then some of the other ones venture forward. They've got missiles and magna rails and ion blasters, though in general those Berserks will be the ones to fear with their big mauls. It looks like there's a Carl running around as well. He's got a teleport crest and a praising glare. I guess he'd probably run with one of the split squads of Hearthkin, unless he's just going completely solo. Otherwise, there's 1 squad of Hernkin Jaegers with their plasma knives for some infiltrating and making sure that all the Sagitors can scout. And also surging forward with scout moves, there's 2 units of Hernkin Pioneers, 1 of 6 and 1 of 3, providing their nice autocannon fire. Overall, looks all very solid and scary. Lots of big hitting damage and small units to go about doing secondary objectives while it's going on. Again, not really all that much changed for Leagues of Votann in the last balance update. It seems that the drop on the Brockir Thunderkin wasn't enough to tempt to put any in the land fortresses here. In any case though, with the Xenos armies talked about, that's just about the end of it for this video. Look forward to hearing all your thoughts on the army list down in the comments below. As ever, if I manage to miss anything or get certain things wrong about the armies, I'll post a pinned comment, and feel free to let us know any other interesting insights as to how they were played too. Obviously none of them are my army list, so I'm certain I'll be missing all manner of subtleties about most of them. Finally though, I'll just cycle back to the video sponsor today in Titan's Terrain. As mentioned, one option amongst many for Warhammer 40K terrain with their pop-up battlefield system. All terrain sets do have their pros and cons. I'd say for the Titan's Terrain, the biggest advantages are that they're just really easy to store in those small boxes. And it means that you might often be able to bring some terrain along in some cases where you wouldn't otherwise if space was limited, like you weren't going in a car or something. They are far cheaper than a whole board of Games Workshop terrain, at least somewhat comparable with MDF. And they don't need any painting or assembly or anything like that. It's all ready to go absolutely immediately. For disadvantages of it, it's maybe a little bit less sturdy and hard wearing than plastic or MDF, given it's made of cardboard and it's designed to fold flat. That is kind of inevitable, and you need to take a little bit more care of it than with some terrain sets, I guess. The grid layout maybe can mean that it's got a little bit less flexibility than some of the other terrain sets as well, that you can make a good amount of variation by rotating the tiles and the way that you choose to set up the buildings. And it might not be the worst idea just to supplement it with a couple small regular bits of terrain, maybe to break up a firing lane or two. It doesn't really do tournament approved layouts, but I've had good feedback that it can be a good choice for some casual games of 40k. In any case, for the actual sets they have on offer, here's their Forgotten Furnace one. This one's styled as a sort of chaos-style industrial zone with lots of glowing ruins and factories and things. Then there's a more traditional ruined hive city type one, lots of bombed out ruins and lots of slate grey stuff and rubble, and a few armoured containers. And then finally there's an overgrown capital one, a bunch of twisted ancient ruins that could still work pretty well for sci-fi, though perhaps could be a bit more appropriate for things like a fantasy style setting compared with the previous two. In any case, each of those also has an expansion set as well. The city and the capital one both have a great big cathedral type thing made by putting two tiles together, and the equivalent for the factory one is the Infernal Spire, for one great big centerpiece structure to fight around. In any case, as always, an absolutely massive thank you to them for sponsoring this one. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to take a look at their range. In any case though, I'll leave that there for this one. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the 40k videos coming and new ones out just about every day. Check out the Patreon page if you'd like to support the channel in the video description. There's a few benefits, including seeing certain videos early and votes on what comes next. But otherwise, just a thank you for listening to this one, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.